This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Everywhere there are lighting poles, there's one more opportunity to save money. Intelligent Illuminations provides cost-effective wireless lighting solutions for roadway or area outdoor lights. Kanawha Valley Arena, Virginia's cowboy town, hosts an array of events from Civil War reenactments to diesel truck pulls. More information online at virginiarodeo.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and welcome back to Delegate Bobby Orrock. Appreciate your being with us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
First elected in 1989, began serving in 1990.
Who would have thought?
Yes,
Yeah.
who would have thought? And as you've risen up in seniority, one of the more senior members of the House, not necessarily in age, but in seniority.
I think that just relates to gray hairs that come, but yeah. Okay.
And chair of the Health, Welfare, and Institutions Committee in the House, as well as ranking member behind the chair of House Finance, who is retiring.
Yeah.
So looks for an interesting year coming up. But let's start with 2013 session and get your take on some of the issues that you all resolved, and some of them you resolved by passing, others you realized did not need to be passed.
Right. Well, of course, the biggie was the budget, and we finally got that resolved as a part of that this year. In the waning days, Medicaid expansion as a part of the Affordable Health Care Act became a major factor as to whether we were even going to get a budget or not. The House version that went to the Senate had no means of expanding the current Medicaid program, and the Senate was pretty insistent, especially at the final days there, that it had to be considered. The challenge, I think, for most of us, philosophically, no one feels that individuals who don't have the financial wherewithal to provide for their medical care, accident, injury, illness, we need to, as a caring society, provide for their needs. The problem in most of our minds is that under the current system, there's very little patient responsibility that attaches underneath that, and the federal government writes the rules so that Virginia has no control over ways can we address the needs of the Virginia citizens just as effectively, but in a more cost-efficient manner. Because we know at the end of the day, if an individual can't find a physician who takes Medicaid patients, they go to the hospital, and the hospital has to see them, and we know that the cost, because they went to the hospital, are going to be much greater. So in the final analysis on the budget, we came up with a provision whereby before we would even consider Medicaid expansion, we needed to reform the underlying Medicaid system. And the only way to do that is to go to the federal government requesting waivers as to ways that we can actually meet the needs of the patients, do it more cost effectively. And the intent, I think, of most of the legislators who supported that language is that when it's all said and done, we will find a way where that with the existing or maybe even less funding than we currently have out there in the Medicaid program for the state's reimbursement, we can meet the needs of more citizens, we can expand it, and it's a win-win for everybody. And so that was, in the waning days, one of the more major issues that came to the fore. Some of us are being accused of therefore voting for Medicaid expansion and just usurping again to the federal government. But there's nothing further from the truth if they read the specifics of the language, that until we can reform the delivery mechanism, get the needed services to the citizens, but do it where that we can control the cost, we can control the access points, so that everybody benefits. And that's, I think, what's in the best interest of the Commonwealth and those citizens who need the services.
So the process that you all passed in the budget then sets up between now and the time, I suppose, that budget would expire next June 30.
June 30th, yeah.
June 30 of 2014, to try to see if in that interim time something can be worked out.
Right. We established a commission, and there's been some questions that have attached from certain quarters, from some of the legal beagles, as it were, that it's not constitutional for us to delegate to a commission to spend these monies. We do it all the time. The Constitution does require the Assembly to appropriate the funds. And those appropriations are in this budget because they're actually just federal flow-through anyway in the first year, because the federal government says they're going to pay 100% of it. And throughout the budget, we allocate monies, or excuse me, we appropriate monies to departments, to secretariats, to commissions, but then they do the final allocation after certain criteria that they may have established have been met. And that's all that this does as well. It says that this commission, comprised of 4 House members and 4 Senate members, when a majority of each body's representation, meaning at least 3 and 3 from each, feel that reforms have been sufficient, then we can go ahead with Medicaid expansion. Of course, this is all subject to action of next year's legislature when we get to weigh in on the caboose part of the budget as well, potentially. So it does get the issue of reform squarely before the federal government and squarely before the policymakers in the bureaucracy here at the Commonwealth as to how we can meet those needs of our citizens more cost effectively.
It looks like it puts Virginia in a good position of saying to the federal folks, we're willing to negotiate, and if you all reform, make some substantive reforms, then we could move forward. So,
and we hope that the federal government will look at the fact that Virginia isn't trying to deny services to any of the patients, but just are there ways to address those needs in a more cost-effective manner. Right now, had we not embarked upon this approach, then the governor of every state that has expanded Medicaid, the federal language allows that state to automatically expand it once the governor says, yes, we're going to expand. So Virginia is unique in that we're also the only state that I'm aware of that has taken this legislative approach of saying we are now, and the governor having signed the budget, it is the law, at least until June 30th, we're going to be the ones that this commission has to be looking at reform before any expansion can be considered.
and we could tell the viewers, although I don't have the specific date in mind, that they can go on the General Assembly calendar, and the first meeting of that commission is scheduled. They're open to the public,
Right.
So that this will not be something that will be taking place
Right.
behind closed doors in any ways. It's like the regular
Right.
meetings that you all have when you're in session.
An excellent point there, David, very much so, that the entire legislative process is open to public purview and scrutiny, and this as a part of that as well.
So I would imagine that it could be a significant number of people who would come to that meeting, some that are coming, and if they have public comments, as they probably will, saying we want expansion, others saying no, we don't want expansion,
Right.
and given their reasons, and that's the process of citizens being involved.
And as it should be, yeah.
Yes.
And of course, the other biggie in the budget was the transportation plan. The beginning days of session, I had circulated a questionnaire back home, and I think most every legislator who had done the same type thing got the
Right,
same answer,
yes.
that jobs and the economy was the single biggest issue on the minds of the folks in our districts. The challenge we are dealing with in that regard, the transportation problem, is probably the single biggest impediment to improving the private sector economy, to the private sector being able to create more jobs that we as state policymakers have any direct control over. We're currently trying to address the transportation needs of 2013 with revenues that were established in 1986. And I don't know that anyone could say, yeah, 1986 dollars in revenues are going to be able to meet the needs that we have today, given the cost increases, the population increase. The fact of the matter, under the current revenue stream that we have in the transportation fund with a 17.5-cent gas tax and the other revenues that accrue, we're going to run out of money for new construction in approximately 2 to 2.5 years. If we do nothing, then in 2.5 years, You can close the doors in this Commonwealth to new road construction, matters not what the 6-year plan calls for. That will have a tremendous chilling effect on the private sector economy, jobs that will be eliminated in the construction industry. So I think any reasonable individual will say we've got to change how we're currently doing things. Now, that being said, reasonable minds can disagree on the specifics, and there was a lot of disagreement on the measure. I finally voted for the bill, but there are pieces of it that still I don't like. And I suppose maybe that is the truest sense of a compromise when you vote for something that nobody likes 100%, because that way everybody wins some and loses some. But in the final analysis, when you look at the vast majority of the Commonwealth, if you're not in Northern Virginia or you're not in Tidewater, the bill that we passed is largely a tax wash for you. It just changes how we're going to be levying those taxes. Is it a more sustainable means of getting those revenues in the future or not? July 1, the 17.5-cent gas tax goes away. So overnight, on the one hand, theoretically, the price of a gallon of gas should drop 17.5 cents. But, time out, Paul Harvey, rest of the story. July 1, we implement a 3.5% sales tax on the wholesale price based on a wholesale price of $3.50 a gallon or greater as it may increase. When you break that all down, then the tax cost on a gallon of gas, July 1 this year, should be approximately 6 cents less than what the motorist is paying now. Hopefully, the oil companies will pass that through. I think the laws of private sector supply and demand will have that effect. So that's the good news, that July 1, motorists should actually see a slight reduction in fuel cost. They will, motorist and non-motorist alike, July 1 see a slight increase in the sales tax. And that's basically how you hold that harmless. The sales tax will increase by 0.3% on all the products that we buy except for groceries and non-prescription drugs. That all of the things that currently are subject to the state sales tax will increase 0.3%. When they do the studies in my area, that is as close to a wash as you, I think, can ever get. Depending on what numbers you look at, I've seen that on the net may be a $30 increase in taxes to the average citizen or to a $30 to $50 decrease in taxes over a year's time. So it's incredibly negligible. If you are in Northern Virginia or Tidewater, there are significantly greater increases in the taxes in those areas. But they ask for them, and with the caveat that these taxes that they will generate, these revenues they will generate, will be used for transportation needs in their respective areas. We know those are the two areas of the Commonwealth with the most critical transportation needs. We know transportation in those areas is an incredible impediment to job creation. It's an incredible problem in their quality of life and the time it takes individuals not only to get to work, but get to the soccer game, to go out to eat. So anything that we can do in those areas that will assist them in addressing that need, we know is a benefit to all the citizens of the Commonwealth, because as they address more of their pressing needs, the rest of the Commonwealth, in my mind, will benefit, because those are needs that are going to be taken off the table, and we as the rest of the Commonwealth don't need to be focusing on to the same extent that we are now.
You know, you're talking about $1986, 2013. It caused me to reflect whether the price at the grocery store or any other place. I think if anyone stops to think about it, they'll realize that there's no area of the economy, no area of their own personal budget or family budget that you could really survive on if you were just using the 1986 dollars to try to then go to the marketplace now.
As a public school teacher, I would hate to have to try and meet my financial needs based on the salary I was making in 1986 as a teacher.
Yes, yes, so. And I think the rest of us in different professions would be saying the same. You mentioned school, public school teacher. You teach in the agriculture area. That's where your degree is, and working with students. There were some contentious issues here at the General Assembly that related to agriculture this time. There was, I mean, I remember one about fox penning, and I remember something about right to farm and other issues, and probably ones that people don't understand unless they were here and really following them that closely.
Right.
What can you tell our viewers?
Well, the fox penning didn't come to my subcommittee, so I didn't have to weigh in on that one. But we had a bill this year. It was from in the Prince William, Loudoun County area, and it was an amendment to the Right to Farm Act. I think it's important for people to understand what the purpose of the Right to Farm Act was in the first place. It was put on the books since I've been here, so in the last 20 years roughly, and it was put in as a response to the fact that in a lot of communities where farms were currently in existence, as those communities saw residential development, there was a lot of local pressure from those subdivisions that came in and initially liked having this idyllic farm next to them. Once they move in, they realized farms inherently bring certain smells potentially, certain hours of operation and machines running that may conflict with their sleep patterns. So there was a lot of pressure on local governments to basically start running farms out. And so the entire agriculture community, not too many years ago, I believe the initial bill was put in about 12, 14 years ago, got behind an effort to codify the right to farm. And if you look at the existing language, it basically says that if a landowner is engaged in these production agriculture activities, you have an inherent right to do so. Local government cannot ban you from doing that. Neighbors can't sue you because you're just farming and things of that nature. Well, what this proposed change this year would have affected would be to say that as a part of the right to farm, not only do you have the right to farm, but you would have the right to direct market farm goods. And the patron and the proponent said, well, it's all about property rights. Doesn't a property owner, doesn't a farmer have the right to sell what they produce? And I could go a long ways on agreeing with that argument, but the language of the bill, and it is all about the words, it's not about what the intent. It's all about what the actual black and white letter of the words you're drafting would allow. It would stipulate that under the right to farm, you as a farmer would have the right to sell agricultural products, no stipulation that they had to be grown on your farm. You set your own hours, you build it however you want to build it, so long as 50% or more of what you sold were agricultural products. The other 49% could be any and everything else. You could sell tires, you could sell clothes, you could sell cars, whatever. The reality is it would create a circumstance where under the guise of a farmer having certain property rights, if you lived next to a farm, you would have zero property rights to be able to weigh in as to whether a de facto 7-Eleven was going in next door. They could set their own hours of operation. They would be exempt from any local government intervention and restriction and special use permits requiring anything so far as egress, driveways, things of that nature. So while the general premise might have been good, it just went way too far. Towards the end of giving farmers greater latitude in what they sell, there's a totally different code section that addresses those things that farmers can directly sell or sell off their property or at a farmer's market. And I had a bill in this year that markedly increased those items that a farmer could sell that had been homegrown, home produced, home processed, and now will be exempt from state regulation and state intervention. The only two criteria that were put in place on that bill, and pickles being an example of those, up until June 30th of this year, if I produce pickles at home, I can't sell them to the public unless I have been through a Department of Agriculture inspection process and am licensed. As of July 1 of this year, because of my legislation, if I produce pickles at home and want to sell David a jar of pickles and he wants my pickles because he's been to my house as a guest and knows I make great pickles, I can now sell him a jar legally so long as on that jar there is a label that says who produced them, and here's a physical address where they were produced, and on that label it says they were produced in an uninspected kitchen. so that you understand
Right.
Bobby's kitchen is my kitchen and the state
Right.
didn't come in and give their whatever on it. But if there's a problem, then everybody knows y'all better come check Bobby's kitchen because that's where the problem is. And all the proponents behind the measure agreed to that language because it's only reasonable. Mm-hmm. They're not afraid of the scrutiny that would come if there's a problem. As a matter of fact, they welcome that, as we all would, for the public health and protection. So it was an interesting dynamic where that under the right to farm, because the original bill went too far, and there were those of us who tried to pare it back to something more reasonable. You know, we've been branded anti-farmer, and that especially struck me as ironic, having devoted 34 years of my life to teaching agriculture, which is really I'm teaching an applied science class because that's what agriculture is. It's applying the life sciences, the plant science, animal science, and the physical sciences of what we do in the shop so that students get an applied science class that they can use for the rest of their lives.
Well, there were certainly some observers here around Capitol Square who really weren't involved in that legislation, but thought it didn't seem to be properly named because it didn't really have that much to do about farming as it did about just expanding what could be
what they could directly sell. And one of the other sidebars on that, it would even say that artwork was a part of now agricultural products. Anything made from agricultural byproducts was now something that came under that definition of agricultural products. I could direct market my manure. I could make things that there are some folks, little odd trivia here, there's actually a market in some quarters for jewelry that has been made from chicken droppings, where they have taken those chicken droppings.
You got to be kidding.
I'm serious as a heart attack. Encased them in a lucite.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And because each one is different, they have certain, I guess, artistic qualities. And then I've seen them as earrings, as pendants, things of that nature. Quite interesting.
Yes.
So that would now be agricultural products you could sell under this bill if it had gone forward. And
Well, on other matters, as you think about the upcoming session, and your position on the Finance Committee in the House, of course, that's not the committee that appropriates, as most folks know. It's the one that considers revenue and on health, welfare, and institutions. Do you see some other issues that you'd want to mention that people might want to start paying attention to now this summer before next session arrives?
Well, and I hope that I will be here next session. There is an election between now and then, and I've got a primary challenge, so I've got to get through that, and if successful, then prevail in November as well. But yes, on the two areas you mentioned in finance, we've actually got a tax reform commission that is meeting that I sit on that, and it's looking at the exemptions that are currently out there in our state tax policy. The exemptions, the credits, things of that nature, and just trying to get a handle. Many of those have been on the books 30, 40, 50 years. And does it make sense in today's world, not unlike the car tax, drawing a line in the sand in '86 and saying, well, that's going to last forever? We need to examine the tax policies periodically. And so that is a body that is going to be meeting here again in public meeting, as you alluded to earlier, with the opportunity for citizen input as to are these certain tax preferences serving the best interest of all the citizens of the Commonwealth, or just little special interests? And that's what we're trying to ferret out, not addressing the needs of special interests, but the needs of the Commonwealth as a whole. And on the health issue, the Federal Health Care Reform Act and its effects on the Commonwealth as we go forward in trying to address the health needs of all of our citizens, what impact is it also going to have on the private sector economy, the business community. That, of course, is going to be one of the big issues, I think, of the coming session next January. And we will also, as a part of that, see what has transpired as it relates to the Medicaid reform component.
So it sounds like a very busy session. The one that ended on time was a short session, 46 days. The one coming up would be a 60-day
session.
60-day session.
And as always, I think politics is just like the ancient Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times, for the Chinese reason that it's the problems of life that make it interesting. So thereby may you be plagued with problems. And we never seem to be lacking for those when the session comes around.
Yeah, it's like what the Chinese character for crisis also means opportunity.
That's right.
Yes, so
That's right.
So that's all of our language for the day. But Delegate Bobby Orrock, thank you very much for being on This Week in Richmond, and we look forward to talking with you and working with you in the years to come.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Everywhere there are lighting poles, there's one more opportunity to save money. Intelligent Illuminations provides cost-effective wireless lighting solutions for roadway or area outdoor lights. Kanawha Valley Arena, Virginia's cowboy town, hosts an array of events from Civil War reenactments to diesel truck pulls. More information online at virginiarodeo.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.